This video is brought to you by Sailrite. Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions. In this full tutorial video, we're going to be showing you how to make slatted Roman shades. These shades are installed over a closet to hide the closet and give it a great look, but typically they're installed in windows. The process is the same. Watch this video and you too can make your own slatted Roman shades. A slatted Roman shade has battens or wooden slats that are in pockets, and those pockets are sewn in the decorative fabric. So whether you're making this for a closet like we are, or for a window, we're going to show you how it's done. The first step is measuring.
The first step in making your slatted Roman shade is to take measurements of the opening where you're going to be installing it. Usually they go in windows, but they also work great for closets like this. So we need a height measurement and a width measurement. For the height, we want to measure from where we want it to actually be mounted. For us, it's going to be mounted on that top shelf of this closet. And then we'll measure down to where we want it to stop at the bottom. For us, it's about 89 3/4 inches. We're going to have it stop just at this bottom shelf. And for the width measurement, from side to side where we want the finished shade to stop, for us, 29 inches looks about perfect. Now we're ready to build it. After you've taken measurements of your window, we're going to come to the Sailrite fabric calculator on the website and put our measurements in it. At the Sailrite website, scroll down to the bottom. Click on the fabric calculator button. Now you can see multiple projects. We're going to scroll down to the window treatments and click on that. There are multiple types of curtains or shades here. We're going to go and click on the slatted Roman shade. Now we can enter our measurements. We have the width, height, and the fabric that we've selected, which is 54 inches wide. Now the width of the slat battens. We picked up these slats at a hardware store, actually Ace Hardware, but you can get them at any one of the Home Depots or Lowe's. This is a 1/4 inch by 3/4 inch by 8-foot stick. The width of the slat battens is automatically 1, but I'm actually going to be using a 3/4 inch batten. So I'm going to put 3/4 in here. I'm going to be making 2 shades, so I'll make this 2. If you have any questions about any one of these fields, just click the question mark and it'll give you an explanation of what each field is. I don't need to worry about the vertical repeat because my width is not large enough to be concerned about it, so I'm not going to put anything in there. Now we hit the calculate button. If we scroll down, we have the cut sizes to make our panels. We have the calculated measurements to strike the material. We have the number of lift lines, the amount of lift lines, and a list of materials that we need to order to make these slatted Roman shades. Scroll down a little bit further and you see the rendering of the shades with all the fold lines and sew lines indicated on the panels. Since I have 2, there's obviously 2 shades down here, and those shades are centered in the middle of the fabric. In the cut sizes, you'll see a decorative fabric cut size and a lining fabric cut size. The lining is completely optional. The decorative fabric for our shade is 32 inches by 114 3/4. Now, the fabric calculator always centers the panel in the middle of the fabric for a pattern, obviously. So if you have more than 2 shades, each shade will have the pattern directly in the center of the fabric.
Now we know the cut size of our decorative fabric. That'll be the first fabric that we cut. To pick your shade fabric, visit the Sailrite website. You'll find thousands of decor and upholstery fabrics that'll work great for a shade like this.
First thing we need to do is make sure that the cut edge is straight.
For our fabric, we're using a Covington fabric, available at Sailrite.
We're also going to cut off the selvage edge. Now that we have the selvage edge cut off, I have straight lines, so it's easy for me to cut the selvage edge off. We're going to measure from that edge over to 32 inches according to the calculator. So that puts us right here in the middle of these 2 lines, so I'll be able to just cut straight up. If your fabric isn't striped like that, then you'll have to take a few measurements by moving the ruler up and striking another line at the appropriate distance.
Then you would use a straight edge to strike a line and cut upon that line. To mark our fabric, we're using the chalk pencil cartridge set that's available from Sailrite.
Okay, we're using the clear acrylic ruler. You can line it up with this line so we make sure that we can strike a line that's straight across the length of our fabric. This is actually across the width of our fabric, but this indicates the correct length for our shade.
The cut length of our decorative fabric accounts for extra fabric. Some of that will be used for a facing strip. That's next.
From the bottom of the shade, we're going to cut off a facing strip that's 6.5 inches.
Cutting off this facing strip at the bottom edge is necessary before hemming the sides of your decorative fabric. Now, coming up next, we're going to show you how to hem the decorative fabric if no lining were used. If you plan on using a lining fabric, you should skip this chapter to the next one, adding a lining fabric. Here's a look ahead at the finished shades on the tabletop. You can see one has a lining and one does not. In this chapter, we're going to concentrate on hemming the edge of a decorative fabric if no lining is used.
Okay, this is the outside surface of the fabric. We're going to create hems on the sides, so we're going to need to flip this fabric to the underside. So we're going to create a 1.5 inch hem here. First, we'll create a 1/2 inch hem. So as you can see here, I've laid it on here. 1 inch is right on that blue line. So my first fold, the raw edge will fold over to that blue line here, like that. We're going to use a 1/4 inch seam stick for canvas and put it along this edge. This is a really quick way to create a hem. Now I need to move the fabric, so I'll just grab the fabric with that sandbag on top and just do this. And continue on down. Now we'll peel off the transfer paper, revealing the glue, and then there's our 1 inch mark, which creates the 1/2 inch hem. So now all I do is this, and bang, there's our 1/2 inch hem, beautifully created. I'm not pulling or stretching on the fabric, I'm just lining it up and basting it down.
The weighted sandbag at the middle of the shade helps to hold the fabric on the table so we can pull it to the left or right to gain access to the lower or upper portions of the shade.
So we did a 1/2 inch hem here, and to complete our 1.5 inch hem, we need to measure over 2 inches from the edge of that. And that puts our line right there in the middle of this blue line. Now what I want to do is I want to put double-sided tape, but I don't want to put it very close to this edge. The double-sided tape here stops about here, so I'm going to put the double-sided tape basically outside of this blue edge so that I don't have to sew through it, because sewing through it with light fabrics can sometimes cause gum up on the needle. So see how far it's away from this edge? So my stitch will be right in here. You notice that using that sandbag there and then pulling the fabric like this makes it possible for us to work with large projects on a small table like this easily. I highly recommend those sandbags. It keeps everything in place. And then when you need to work on the other end, you just pull on it. That sandbag's kind of in the center, so I don't even have to move it. Then I can work on that end. Peel off the transfer paper. So now I'll base to the middle of that blue line right there where we had our mark and go down the length.
We will repeat this process on the other vertical side. After basting, we use the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler to be sure that the double-sided tape is adhered well.
And before we baste all the way down, we want to measure to make sure that it's within our finished size. For us, it's 29 inches. Yep, it's perfect, 29 inches. If it were off, what I would do is modify this last hem so that it was either in deeper or out further. I'm also going to put the magnetic sewing guide on this sewing machine so that I can use it as a guide to try to keep that fabric up against the edge as I sew. I can also look at my presser feet and make sure that this fold is right between the outside presser foot and the center foot.
When sewing lighter decorative fabrics, be sure to use a smaller thread size than you typically would with the Sailrite Ultra Feed sewing machine and a smaller needle. We also backed off our upper tension to be sure that we got a good stitch.
You may notice that I've draped the fabric in my lap, and I have the fabric going over the edge of the table with my one hand out here and my one hand here as a guide. So I'm using this hand and this hand as a guide to guide my fabric in nicely and to keep the fabric nice and flat as I sew. When I run out of space, I stop sewing and I rearrange my fabric, and then I reposition my hands.
We're sewing this project with the Sayrite Ultrafeed LS1 sewing machine set up with the workhorse servo motor in the industrial tabletop. Want to make your slatted Roman shade with a lining on the back side? Well, that's next. If you do not plan on using a lining, skip this chapter.
The lining is an optional step. So we showed a shade that we just did hems on the edge without a lining. Now we're going to show a shade with the lining. So our calculator says I need to cut the lining to 28 inches by 107 3/4 inches. So I'm going to basically put those marks on the fabric and cut this lining to size.
Visit the Sayrite website and you'll find a variety of lining fabrics that'll work great for shades like this, including blackout lining fabrics, meaning the sun will not show through the shade.
The decorative fabric is laying with outside surfaces facing up. This is the underside. Then my lining fabric is placed over top of it with its outside surface, if it has an outside surface, facing down. I'm going to put my sandbag kind of in the middle of this so I can pull the fabric back and forth. And what I want to do is I want to put seam stick very close to the raw edge of the decorative fabric on the outside surface. We want to use a 1/4 inch seam stick for canvas here. This is a non-yellowing double-sided tape. And by keeping it very close to this raw edge, we won't have to sew through it, which could eventually gum up our needle when you're sewing light fabrics. So we're going to try to keep it out of the needle area. So now with my sandbag at the middle position, I can pull the fabric on a very small table like we have here, and then just let it droop and put basting tape down the rest. Now I'm going to pull the fabric back because I like to work from that end and then work down. So I'm going to move my weight here, my sandbag, and I have to position the lining fabric so it's even with this long edge. But before I do that, I'm going to peel off the transfer paper because I can start basting this in place when I start doing this. So I'm going to peel it off to the end of my table. I'm going to move this panel over so that it's right on that edge, lined up. Okay, so I'm going to work out the wrinkles and I'm going to baste it so that the edges are lined up. We've got to make sure that everything lays flat, so I'm just going up the panel. And basting and matching up the raw edges as I go. If I'm off, I can peel it up a little bit and rebaste it. Now once it's basted down, you want to make sure that it's laying nice and flat. Don't worry if you're a little bit off at the top or the bottom a little bit. As long as you're very close like I am here, it's going to be fine. There's excess fabric here at the top and also at the bottom. So now we'll move our fabric and baste the remainder.
We won't show the remainder. We'll move on to the next side.
Okay, so the lining fabric is laying nice and flat. We're going to put our sandbag in the middle again, and we're going to start at the end like we always do. And I'm going to put double-sided tape on the decorative fabric very close to the outside edge like we did with the other side. I'm going to remove the transfer paper, revealing the glue, to about the middle position. I have to move the sandbag off of the material, and then I'm going to grab it from the top and grab it from midway as far as I can reach, and I'm going to pull this over and try to line up the edges again, making sure the fabric is nice and straight and flat. So that's why you got to do this kind of carefully, because you don't want wrinkles in it and you don't want it to be uneven from the left side to the right side. We can kind of pull on the fabric here to get things to lay flat. That looks like it's pretty good and flat and directly across from each other. So now I'm just going to baste down the side. I don't want to pull too much on this lining fabric because it'll stretch. So you got to do this very gently. Once you have a portion of it basted down, make sure it's nice and flat. Looks good. The Sayrite needle plate on the ultrafeed machines has lines that indicate how far away you're stitching from the edge of the fabric. We want to put the Deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide on the 1/2 inch line here. We're going to sew a 1/2 inch from the raw edges of the fabric, the lining in the decorative fabric, that is. No reason to do any reversing at the beginning since we have excess fabric at the end.
Once one side is done, repeat that same process for the opposite side, sewing a 1/2 inch from the raw edge of the decorative fabric and the lining fabric.
So I've laid the fabric so that I can work with one side here, and I'm going to be ironing here, and I don't want to iron through the lining fabric, so I'm going to move it out of the way so it doesn't get ironed by accident. And what I want to do is that stitch we just made, I want to lay it towards the decorative fabric, and then I want to crease it with an iron. So I could put an ironing board under this, but this works pretty well even on this wooden table. So I'm going to crease it right down that stitch so that it wants to fold on that stitch. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing over here. So I'm going to pull my fabric so that I have plenty to do that. Okay, again we're going to just crease it over or fold it over towards the decorative fabric. Same thing. Now if you have two people, one person can pull over there on the lining fabric and I can put pressure here, which basically makes the fold happen right on the stitch. So as I'm ironing, he's just pulling on the other side and pulling on the decorative fabric, and this goes a lot faster. But you can do it by yourself as well, as we showed earlier. Okay, before we turn this right side out, we want to get rid of excess stitches and make sure that there's no trash or threads on the inside, because you may see those if it goes up in a window. So we're going to inspect our shade, and looks good. Now we'll turn it right side out. Just put my hand on the inside, grab the top, pull it out. So I put my thumbs on the inside of this basically pillow, and what I want to do is I want to create a fold here with the decorative fabric wrapping over here and wrapping over here of equal size. Measure that, and it's 1 inch. And then if I come over here, it too is 1 inch, so it's perfect like this. Now my fabric, if you look over here, has a stripe on it, so I can basically fold it right to that stripe. It's kind of like a cheating thing all the way down this side, and then I can concentrate on the other side. And I would again use my iron and crease the fabric well at that location. So I can use my fingernails and I can grab the fabric. Now I want that fold on the inside to be tucked into this assembly here. So I want to make sure that excess fabric is being folded into the hem that I'm creating. If it isn't, I need to push it in there. The majority of it will, because we creased it earlier. Now before I go too far, I'm going to go back to this side and do the same thing. And now what I should do is I should measure to make sure that I have the width that I want. Okay.
The width is confirmed, now we just iron both sides. The remainder of this video will show a shade with a lining fabric. If you do not have that, you'll still need to follow the same steps in the remaining chapters.
And I'm gonna move the fabric so it's working across the table like this. We're gonna find the bottom edge. Now if you have a directional fabric, in other words a pattern that definitely is the top side, you need to be making sure that you're working with the bottom side of the fabric. For us, we don't have a directional fabric, so this side could be the bottom, that side could be the bottom. This will now be the bottom. So we're going to take our 6-inch strip of facing that we cut earlier. We want to make sure this bottom edge is square. If it's not, then we need to trim it to size or either strike a line down that edge. So I'm using my clear acrylic ruler to ensure that it is, and it looks like it's completely square. So now what we'll do is we'll put double-sided tape on this panel, and we will put it close to the edge of this, making sure that we have lining fabric that's very close to the edge, and we do. If we didn't, then we'd want to cut the fabric off so it was even with the lining fabric underneath. Peel off the transfer paper, and then we're going to take our facing with the outside surfaces facing each other. We know its edge is straight, and we're going to baste it right along that edge, making sure that our stripes are lined up. If you don't have stripes, you don't have to worry about this part, and it should be centered with excess fabric on both the left and right hand side. There we go, and the stripes are not perfect, but they're close enough. This is actually going to be rolled to the other side, so it really doesn't matter that much. So we're going to strike a line that's approximately 3/4 inch. Whatever the line is, it needs to be perfectly parallel with that edge, because we need this line to be perfectly straight. So this line's 3/4 of an inch away from the raw edge of the fabric. We're going to remove the deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide here because we have a line that we can follow here. And I can feel the fabric underneath my actual shade fabric, so I'm going to lower the foot there. No need to sew, only in the area where the shade is. And I will do some reversing here. Now the lining fabric is not pinned or basted, so I'm going to put my fingers up here with my thumb and my forefinger, and I'm going to grab the fabric, and then I'm going to have my hand down back here, and I'm going to pull slightly so that the lining fabric feeds exactly in line with all the other fabrics. Then when I get to a spot where I can no longer reach, I'll just come over here and grab the fabric at another location and continue.
If you don't have a lining fabric, the steps are still the same.
I can feel my shade fabric underneath, so I know where it's stopping, so I'm going to do some reversing there. Our facing fabric is underneath, and we are going to roll it out, and then again, like we did before, we're going to take this seam and roll it towards the decorative fabric, or the facing fabric in this situation, and then crease it with an iron. Now we're going to take this facing and we're going to roll it up, and we're going to create a crease down here, which makes a beautiful finished edge, with the outer fabric a little bit hanging over the edge, as you can see here. This means you won't be able to see this facing fabric because it'll be hidden on the back side. And then we'll crease it well with the iron again. Now I'm going to strike a very light line that is 4 inches up from the bottom edge. That's the edge that is the outer surface, not the fold up here for the facing. Using a chalk pencil to do this. The chalk pencil can be removed with a wet rag, the marks on the fabric. Darker colors are like red and so forth are sometimes more difficult to remove, but lighter colors are easier. So we'll open this up here and we will apply basting tape right along this edge here. And we'll do it down here too. Basically, this basic basting tape just makes it possible for us to insert the rod without hopefully running into this hem here, because we're going to hem this fabric back to this edge. Then crease it well. And do the same thing over here. With those edges folded in, we'll take this and fold it up, and on that line that we struck 4 inches, we'll start to fold the fabric under to that line. Once we're on the line, then we can iron it along that to create a nice crease. Now the bottom edge on the underside looks great. This is the outside, this is the back side. Okay, so we're going to stitch right along this outer edge, and then we're going to stitch from that stitch 1 inch over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure over this way actually, right about there. So I'm about 1 1/8 inches from this folded edge. And I want to make sure that I'm nice and straight, which I am, and I'm going to strike a line that's fairly soft. Okay, so here we are. I'm going to hold my trailing threads and sew this first stitch. Do a little bit of reversing here. I'm just using this inside foot as a guide to keep it close to this fold. When I get to the end, I'll do some reversing here. Now we'll sew on top of that stitch line, doing a little bit of reversing.
This 1 inch area will form the pocket for the bottom rod or the weight rod.
So here I have some water on a rag, and we're just going to show that the chalk line does come up. It's not perfect. You can see a little bit of it, but not much.
Marking segments is next. This will be where each of the pockets go for the slats.
Okay, this is the bottom side. We have the outside facing up, and this is the bottom edge. So now we need our calculator, and we need to start marking the lines. For this shade, we have 7 segments, and all shades have a finishing allowance of 7 inches at the bottom. So that's just excess fabric. So the real important line is this one next. First fold line up from finished bottom edge, which is the dotted line shown below, which we'll show here in a second, is 9.71 inches. So what it's saying with the dotted line is if you scroll up down here, we're on the bottom edge, which is here. So from the finished bottom edge to that dotted line is 9.71 inches for this shade. So these are the important measurements, the calculated measurements. Then up from that line, the next 5 folded lines each go up 15.64 inches from the last. So those will be the 5 segments. And then the last line hopefully will be at 16.85. But if there's some shrinkage or anything like that, we can modify that. That's no big deal. So our first line, 9.71. Okay, there's 9.71. So I'm going to use my chalk pencil here and mark a mark there. Then since I have lines on my fabric, I can use those lines to make sure that my struck line is nice and straight. So I am going to put it on here and check to make sure that it's my clear acrylic ruler is nice and straight.
If you don't have stripes going up and down, you may need to use a T-square.
Then I'm going to strike a very light line here. Don't mark it too heavily, otherwise it may not come off. You always want to check your fabric marking pencils with the fabric that you're using before you use them and see if you can get the marks off. Now this is going to be on a fold here, so in a way, even if the chalk mark doesn't come off, it's probably not going to be visible because this is our actual fold line. Now I make 5 lines up from this last line that I made, for us, 15.64.
I didn't realize it, but the lapel mic dropped into my shirt, so the audio here is not perfect.
I'm just going to keep moving up the fabric, marking it, then I'll strike lines.
For this shade, we have 5 segments, and so what we're doing is measuring up from each of the last lines the amount that the fabric calculator determines.
So now, at each one of those points, I'm going to strike a line and make sure that the line is 90 degrees to the edge of the fabric. So because my fabric has stripes, I can tell that my clear acrylic ruler is perfectly straight. Now I'm going to strike a line only in the center and not go all the way to the edges. This is my fold line. Now if my fabric were really wide, I'd probably have to move this and strike another line, but it's not. I'll move back to the next mark and repeat that step until I have all 5 of those lines marked. Okay, we have all the lines marked on the fabric except for the top line. We'll save that for last. So now that our lines are on the fabric, we need to crease the fabric at each one of those points. So this is the bottom edge, so we're going to start there. There's my line. It's hard to see, but it's there. I'm going to crease the fabric under and put a fold right on that chalk mark that I have. One way you can tell that it's straight is if this fabric lines up with the bottom, and it does. So I'm right on my chalk mark. I'm going to take my iron and crease it well on that mark.
I prefer folding in then ironing on each one of these lines and then taking it over to the sewing machine and sewing.
Okay. Then I'm going to move to the next mark, which is right here. I'm going to grab the fabric, I'm going to lift up on that mark and roll the fabric under to that mark.
In lieu of ironing upon each one of those lines that you struck on the fabric, you could fold the fabric over and pin the fabric layers together, then sew it, and then unpin it, and move on to the next line. It's your choice.
And use my fingernails if I'm a little bit off to move the top of the fabric, because it's a little bit, the mark's a little bit on the high side. There we go. Same thing again. Now this is going to get longer with each one, so we may have to actually help the fabric curl under or sit on top of itself. See how it's crooked there? A second helper could definitely help in this regard. So I'm going to straighten that out so it's a little bit straighter. Now it's a little bit off.
Sorry, my lapel mic is still in my shirt. Pretty soon I figure that out and move it back up, so we'll have better audio here in a minute. We'll continue this process for each one of those lines that we struck on the fabric until we reach the top line. We're going to move ahead and show that part next.
This is my last fold here. The next mark up, which is the last mark in the calculator, determines the height of the shade. We could go ahead and mark it there and just know that there is some shrinkage that possibly happens, so we may have to modify this. It says it should be 16.85 inches up from this last fold line. So this should be the top of the shade, but I'm not going to trust in that until I'm actually done sewing it. 16.85, right about there. So we have extra fabric, which is what we intended. I'm just going to mark it. I'm not going to strike a line there.
Sewing those slat pockets is next.
Okay, you can see finishing allowance at the top is 3 inches. That's just extra fabric. The important one is solid sew lines are 1.125 inches above and below each fold line shown below. So if you look below at our fabric, our panel rendering here, you can see the dotted line is the fold line and the 2 solid lines are the stitch, which will form the pocket. So we need to create 1 stitch above the fold line, and that stitch should be spaced 1.125 inches for us. Yours may be different. Okay, so I'm going to lower my needle and then I'm going to measure over 1 1/8 inch, and I'm going to put my deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide at that locale. So it should be right there. Ugh, these things are hard to move. It's a great magnet. Now, if I measure over from that to the needle, I'm a little bit far, as you can see by that blue line. That blue marker is 1 1/4, or 1 1/8. There we go. That's about perfect. So the fabric is folded on our crease that we made. This is near the top of the shade. Here, the top is up here, and here's the inside of the shade. So we're going to create a stitch 1 1/8 inch from the fold line that we made.
Since our fabric has a lining fabric underneath, it may be helpful to pin the fabric together to keep the lining from moving as we sew.
Do some reversing. This stitch holds every one of these in, so do a little bit of reversing at the beginning and the end.
Since I didn't pin the fabric together, I'm going to be very diligent to make sure that the lining fabric and the decorative fabric are moving at the same rate at that crease.
Now, before we get too far, it's always a good idea to measure to make sure that your stitch is in the right spot. So I'm going to take a measure over here and check. It's perfect. I'm going to hold my hand here to keep the fabric flat. My other hand's kind of in back to help pull it through and guide it. As long as I keep it up against the magnetic guide, it should be perfect. Now what we want to do is we want to go to the next crease, and to do that I'm going to just basically take the fabric and kind of just fold it over to the next crease line. Then I'm going to make sure everything is laying nice and flat. There are no wrinkles on the inside. I can feel that. No wrinkles. So there's my next stitch.
Again, you may want to use multi-use pins and pin the fabric together, both the top side and the bottom side, so that the lining fabric doesn't have a tendency to creep on you while you're sewing very close to this crease. Otherwise, you need to be very diligent to make sure that the fabric feeds in consistently. You'll need to do that for each one of the crease locations. We will not show all of them. Do the same procedure for every single one of them, all the way down to the bottom of the shade where the last crease is.
If you'd like, you can cut your loose threads with scissors or nippers, or you can use the thread burner that Sayrite carries. We'll turn it on and just push the trigger, and this cuts the thread and seals the ends of the thread as well. So you just have to be careful not to burn the fabric. This is the bottom of the shade, and we want these slats to be folded down. So I'm just going to touch it with an iron to just kind of start to train it, so it starts to do that at each one of the slats.
All of the slat pockets are complete. Now we're going to concentrate on finishing the top edge. From the bottom edge, we'll measure to the top of the shade.
Okay, I'm going to use a tape measure from the bottom edge, and then I'm going to pull a little bit tight on the shade to make sure that it's taut. Whoops. There we go. And hold that tape measure there. Measure to the next spot, pulling the shade a little bit taut.
And get a friend and help them to pull the fabric fairly taut as you measure. That'll be helpful.
So there's 70 inches. I'm going to mark the 70 inches just with the chalk. Then I'm going to move my fabric and put this on the 70 mark. then measure up, pulling a little bit on the fabric. It'd be good if you had two people to do this so that you could kind of pull on the fabric underneath. And the finished shade is supposed to be 89 3/4. So there's 89 3/4. I'm going to mark it here. Okay. So my calculator says from the last fold line that the top should be 16.85 inches. So there's the top that I measured, and we're 16 1/4. That's why we didn't cut it earlier, because of the fact that sometimes it deviates slightly after you get all the stitching done and the hemming done on the sides. So this is the top of our shade, the finished top of our shade. Okay, I had to use a wet rag to get that chalk mark off because it wasn't completely straight. So I'm using a definite straight edge so that I can get a straight line at the top here. So that's perfect right there.
A T-square like this can be very helpful in fabricating any Roman shade for pockets and such. Sayrite currently doesn't sell anything like this, but you can pick them up at your hardware store usually.
Okay, so now we want a line approximately an inch up from that line. This line will be what we're going to cut off, and then we're going to create approximately a 1-inch hem. No reason to be exactly accurate here. This is going to be folded to the back side. We're going to cut on that line. It's 1 inch up from our finished edge. First, we're going to open up this, and we're going to put some double-sided tape on the lining right at the top. This just holds the lining to the decorative fabric when we create our hem.
As we've stated earlier, this double-sided tape is an acrylic glue made specifically for the marine market, so it doesn't yellow in the sun as other double-sided tapes do, and it's also a 1/4 inch in width.
Sorry about all that water there, that makes it look weird. Now what we'll do is we'll flip it over here and put double-sided tape on the back side. Now we're going to fold to that chalk line that we struck on the material to create this hem at the top edge. So now we have a looped Velcro. This is 1 inch. I'm going to put double-sided tape on the back side a bit. Take off the transfer paper, and then we're going to baste this all the way to the outside edge and very close to the top, but the top should stick out a little bit, as you see here. Do not want the Velcro to be exposed from the front of the shade. Then when you get over here, trim it so that it's flush.
Take it to the sewing machine, and we will sew a straight stitch down the top edge, reversing at the beginning and also when we reach the end. And we will also sew a straight stitch on the bottom edge. No reason to sew any stitching on the sides. Next, we need to sew on the rings. That's typically done by hand. We're going to show you how.
Here's the slatted Roman shade calculator, and you can see here that this shade calls for 2 lift lines, and their spacing is around 27 inches apart, which means they're 1 inch from both edges of the fabric. If your shade were wider, you may have 3 lift lines, and then you'd have to put 1 in the center, maybe 2 in the center, depending on the width. If you scroll down to the rendering down here, you can see that there's a ring at every single slat. Those are the round circles. And if your shade were wide, you would see rings in the middle. I have some heavy duty thread in my hand needle with a double knot on the end, and it's doubled up, as you can see. So this is the top of the shade. For each one of these ribs, we want to sew into this fold here. And we want to be an inch away from the edge of the fabric, which is basically right where our decorative fabric runs. So we're going to go in and come out. We're going through both the lining and the decorative fabric, and we're going to bury our knot on the other end. Now we're going to go through our metal ring. This isn't a plastic ring. Plastic rings can become brittle in the sun. And then we're going to go slightly off to that, because we never want to go through the same hole. So slightly off to the right, and I'm going to go through. probably be left for you, the viewer. And all the way through. Then we're going to go through our ring again. So through the center of the ring. Now we're going to go to the opposite side and go through, catching both our lining and decorative fabric through a new hole. Pull it through. We didn't go through the ring that way. We only go through the ring from this side. So I'm going to go through the ring again. And now I'm going to go to the opposite side yet again, except for not through that same hole, but slightly outside of that same hole that we went, or slightly outside of that first hole when we went through the ring. There we go. Now I want to go through the ring and then come out the other side. This creates kind of like a V pattern. Now if it had a rib or a rod, we'd be going around the bottom of the rod. This does not. Okay? So now what I want to do is I want to go around. So I'm going to come around this direction, see around the bottom of it, and then I'm going to go through a new hole on this side. I'm basically wrapping the bottom of the ring with a loop. So watch this. There's a loop. And now I'm going to go through this side, going back the opposite direction. This is the first opposite direction, to again make one more loop around the bottom. And we'll go through here, one more loop, and then I'll go through a little bit on the outside, and now I'll create a knot. So I'm going to go through there, and now before I finish this, I'm going to run my needle through the hole, and this creates a knot, and I pull snugly on it. Then I insert my needle in, and I come out probably about a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch away from my ring. Pull the thread, pull the needle out, and then I snip my thread flush. And that ring is secured very well, and it won't easily pull out.
We'll repeat that process for every single ring location. Here they are all installed on this side. Now we'll do the same on the opposite side. Next, we'll make the headboard and we'll run the lift lines. The headboard should be the width of the shade. We used a 3/4 inch board and cut it to 1 inch by the width of the shade. For us, 29 inches. 3/4 by 1 inch is what we recommend, but it doesn't have to be that.
So if you have any scrap fabric, you may want to wrap your headboard. It's not necessary, but it does make it look nice, even though mostly it's going to be covered. So I'm going to wrap it around the board and then cut it to the approximate size.
We'll be using the Sayrite upholstery staple gun here, but you can just use a heavy-duty stapler if you like to staple the decorative fabric to the headboard.
This is the side that's going to have the Velcro on it, so all I'm doing is cutting the raw edge off so that it'll be hidden under the Velcro.
At the two ends, we'll fold it like we do a Christmas present, and then place a staple on the side where the Velcro will eventually be stapled on.
So now we just staple on the hooked Velcro, go all the way to the end, put a staple very close to the end, and then I just like to run it down here and put a staple at this end. That way it's on there permanently, and then I can put staples in between. Cut it to size, and then put a few staples. Okay, we're going to insert our leech line through the uppermost ring on this side and run it through every single ring. Then when I get to the bottom ring, I'm going to put it through that ring. We typically use a hot knife to touch the ends of the rope. You could use a lighter, anything like that, to basically seal the end, but the thread burner works as well. Now I'm going to push on the button on the orb and put the line through it. This makes it pretty adjustable. What I like to do is leave a tail approximately the same length of the shade. We can always cut it short if it's too long afterwards, but I have plenty of adjustment that way. We'll do the same thing to that side. So now we're back up at the top of that line that we just installed. We're going to put our finger here and go across this 90 degrees, across the width. Then I'm going to put my finger here, and I'm going to come down, just for safety's sake, about 2 foot or so. And then I'm going to cut the line at that point. Okay, so that one's done. Now we repeat it with this side. So this is our cord lock, and it can be a right-hand mount, in other words over here, so you can pull on the cord on the right hand, or it can be a left-hand mount over here. That's up to you. We're going to take our headboard and stick it to the shade. Then we're going to turn it, because the eyes are going to go here, obviously, for the line, so we're going to turn it like that so it's up. The line we're going to take and we're going to run it straight up here so we know that where the eye is inserted. So the line's going straight up, so the eye will go right into here. I'm going to take an awl and I'm going to just pound a hole in there just to get a hole started. You can use a drill for that as well. And then we will screw in our eye.
Do the same for the eye on the opposite side or any other locations for lift lines.
And now the line runs through the eye, as seen here on this side, and then if you have middle ones, it would run to wherever the cord lock runs. So if I had a middle one and the cord lock was over here, it would run through the eye and over here. I don't have a middle one, and this one runs to the cord lock as well, so it goes in like that. Now we're going to put the cord lock over here. There's a small hole here, and if you look on the other side, there's a large hole. The small hole always goes towards the closest line, which is this one, and you want it fairly close, almost on top of that eye here. But before we do this, we need to run the line through this cord lock, because it's really hard to do after it's screwed to the headboard. So I'm going to go through this hole, then I'm going to flip it, and you can see the inner workings of this system. What I'm going to do is take the end of the line and push it through like that. Then once it's through, I'm going to flip it over. And there's the line coming out the bottom. See, there are 2 wires. This is a small cord lock, and we want one line to go through that wire, and then the second line will go through either the middle or the side wire. You can have up to 2 lines per wire, but we only have 2 lines for this whole system, so I'm going to put my other line all the way over here. Okay, so that's through the small side, like you see through here. Now I'm going to take this line, and I'm going to go through that big hole right here. So through this, through the top, turn it, and then I'm going to go through that pulley system, the 2 gears basically, then out through that second or the furthest wire, and then you need to make sure there are no twists. So this looks perfect. We got one coming through the big hole, one through the small, and there are no twists whatsoever. So I've got it fed perfectly through here. So I basically have it on top of this eye, or right next to the eye, and again I'm going to just use an awl. You can use a drill to pre-punch a hole. screws are not included with this cord lock. You just want to use small screws. There we go. Okay, now with the shade fully extended, we can put that back down like normal, and we can cut these lines approximately 8 to 12 inches underneath the cord lock. So I'm going to cut these about that amount right here so they're even. Okay, now we have a cord condenser, and in the top of the large bell we will feed both these lines. Okay, so there's the cord condenser, and then we will tie a knot. Now we don't want it coming through, so I'm going to do a double knot. I have 2 lines. If I had multiple lines, maybe the knot would be too big, but for this cord condenser, 2 lines, I can get that knot in there easily. Okay, and then I'm just going to trim this off so that they're even. Now we'll take the smaller bell and we will insert the line through its top hole up here. Just 1 line. This is going to be our pole line. And here again we're going to create a knot here. We'll just screw them together now. And there's our cord condenser. Usually we cut this line about midway with the shade all the way extended, but that's up to preference. So I'm going to cut it approximately midway here. Cut the right line, didn't I? Yes, good. And then I'm going to tie my tassel on. These are also available at Sayrite. We're going to go in this side of the tassel, make another knot. Yeah, hit it pretty good. So you can see here, this is the excess we have. It's only a few inches, but it's well worth doing. What I can do is actually come down to the bottom of the shade, grab hold of these lines that are extra, and watch what happens up there. I'm going to pull on them. So that's the extent that I want to go right there to get that condenser as close to that cord lock as possible. So at that position, which is here, I'm going to move my orb to the first ring, and then we'll cut this excess off.
Here are our 2 shades. One has a cord lock on the left and the other on the right, and one has a lining and one does not. Next we'll install the slats and the bottom rod or weight rod in the pockets.
We picked up these slats at a hardware store, actually Ace Hardware, but you can get them at any one of the Home Depots or Lowe's. This is a 1/4 inch by 3/4 inch by 8 foot stick. So you can get different thicknesses as well for your shade, or widths I should say. We wanted a 3/4, and this measures exactly 3/4. It's not a nominal size, it is 3/4, it's actual size. The wooden slats are typically cut a 1/2 inch shorter than the width of your shade, and sometimes after they're cut they need to be sanded just so they go in the fabric nicely. Then just press on the pocket a little bit, which opens up the slot, and push them in.
When the slat reaches the hem, you may have to help it at the opposite end.
Now if you'd like, you could take some hand sewing thread and you can actually sew these ends shut if the slats come out, but I wouldn't do that until you had that problem. We'll do this for all the pockets. So our bottom rod will go in this pocket here, and we definitely want it to be a 1/2 inch shorter, if not a little bit more. So we're going to cut it right there, and these cut with a hacksaw. Okay, it goes in the upper pocket, not the lower pocket. So this keeps the heavy weight, which is required for the cord lock to work, from hitting your sill or either your turn cranks on your windows.
To keep the rod in place, sew the ends of this pocket shut. We will not show that. Our shade covers a closet. Typically they're installed in windows. Installation is about the same for both.
In preparation for installing the shade, we want to pull it all the way up. Okay, it's not level right now because it doesn't really matter. And then we'll flip it around and we will undo the Velcro. Now this gives us opportunity to screw into the headboard. Our shade is going to be mounted and screwed into this board right here. So we're going to screw right through the front, right through the Velcro and the board. If this were an inside mount, you would mount it here, and then you would screw from the bottom into your board like that. The whole idea is this board is just the mounting means to mount it to whatever surface you have. Now it's much easier to install screws with this down on a table or a work surface rather than holding it up here unless you had a second helper.
We've placed the headboard on our ladder and are pre-drilling our screws in place. The process for installing this in a window, which most slatted shades are installed in, is done in exactly the same way.
So now once it's secured, the nice thing about the Velcro is you can position it wherever you want and then make sure that it's perfectly straight. So if you're not happy with it, you can move it to the left or the right or cock it a different direction. And that's pretty much the whole shade installed. So you can see that we're a little bit crooked according to the shelf here. You can either adjust that by moving the top Velcro around, or remember we put these orbs on the bottom here. So we can actually just release the orb a little bit to drop this side. Don't do it much. See how a little bit does a lot? So now we're almost level here. This orb probably can go up a little bit. Nice. Okay, so the first time that you use it, you can expect this kind of thing to happen. See how it's not pleating or folding right where we want it to? It will need to be trained. So leaving it up after you fix it will actually make it so it eventually folds there. So you may want to leave it up for a week all the way at the top with the pleats in the right spot. So all I need to do is come back here and fix all of these so they lay nice and flat. This is called training your decorative shade or your Roman shade. In this situation, a slatted Roman shade. Now, if we're a little bit crooked, which we are here, that can be adjusted either with the Velcro or the orbs.
Don't go away. The materials list and the tools list is coming up next. It is only through your loyal support that these free videos are made available. Thanks for your loyal support. And be sure to subscribe to the Sayrite YouTube channel. Click the bell to be notified of new videos when they become available. Thanks.
Our slatted Roman shades are now complete. You will find thousands of beautiful decor and upholstery fabrics at the Sayrite website. The Sayrite Fabric Calculator also gives you a full list of materials that you will need and the quantities you'll need for the shade or shades that you need. It will not display the tools that you need, so refer to this list. If you have any questions, be sure to give us a call or email us at Sayrite. We are glad to help. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sayrite, thanks for watching. Here are some related videos that may be of interest to you. Click on a link if you'd like to view them.